Well, Russia has downplayed the likelihood of a summit with Ukraine's leader, even as Kyiv signaled its readiness for any format of conversation just to end the war. The Foreign Minister Sergey Lavrov has demanded Moscow be included in any talks on security guarantees for Ukraine. And he warned that such discussions, which exclude Russia, will lead nowhere. NATO military leaders have gathered for talks on the issue. US President Trump had pledged that Washington will play a role in assuring Ukraine's security earlier this week. We're joined now for more insight by Dr. Matthew Sussex, who's Associate Professor at the Griffith Asia Institute, Griffith University, also visiting fellow at the Strategic and Defence Studies Centre at Australian National University. Professor, Russia condemns Western discussions about security guarantees for Ukraine made without Moscow's involvement as a road to nowhere. Can I get your thoughts on what you think Russia's motivation is behind strongly opposing such talks now?
Yes, well, I think that the main takeaway from this is a continuation of Russian diplomacy as it's been really since before the conflict started, and that's to drag out the potential for any off-ramps or for any realistic peace processes while it believes that it's winning. And I think the fact that, Russian forces continue incrementally, very slowly, but nonetheless continue to be taking territory from Ukraine is an indication for Vladimir Putin that, inexorably in the end, Russia can be victorious and communicate that to Ukraine, that they should come to the bargaining table and accept, a very Russia-friendly type of peace. When it comes to security guarantees, it's certainly the case that Russia has absolutely no interest in seeing NATO or EU boots on the ground, and it's said on a number of occasions that it wouldn't tolerate that. The problem is, of course, for Ukraine to be able to feel secure in the aftermath of hostilities ceasing. It's really going to have that kind of security presence. Otherwise, the type of assurances that could be given to Ukraine are just as flimsy as way back in 1994, when, of course, Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons. And that's something that it regrets very much to this day.
Yeah, well, NATO defense chiefs aren't stopping. They're not listening to Russia. They continue discussing enduring security guarantees for Ukraine. Can you talk to us about how NATO's involvement could evolve given Russia's explicit rejection of troop deployments?
Yes, well, what's been talked about is a sort of NATO-like set of security guarantees, but the extent to which that involves NATO members or EU members deploying military personnel to Ukraine is still something that's very much open for discussion. There are about 30 nations that are part of this so-called coalition of the willing who are discussing the types of things that they might be able to provide to Ukraine, whether or not it's weapons, whether it's intelligence, whether it's logistics, or whether it's actually, people, combat personnel. And there's some vacillation between, the European leaders about this. Friedrich Merz, for instance, the German Chancellor, has said he doesn't think that German forces on Ukrainian soil is a good thing. But then there's others who do think so. The point here, I guess, is that, well, if this is not acceptable to Russia, then Russia will just simply keep on fighting, just as if the incentives for security for Ukraine aren't sufficient, they can also keep on fighting. So I think there's a long way to go before we get to a realistic peace in this conflict.
Meantime, Moscow renews its demands to control Donetsk and for demilitarization as part of any peace settlement. Professor, how do you see Ukraine positioning itself in response to these, and what does it mean for negotiations?
Yes, well, of course, Russia only controls about 50% of Donetsk Oblast, which is really very big. And given that the Ukrainians are in charge of half of it, they would be very loath to give that up, especially because Donetsk includes a whole number of sort of fortress cities, if you like, that the Russians have been unable to crack for 3.5 years. And if Ukraine were to agree to give all those up, then not only is it a large amount of territory, but it's also strategically important territory. And that would open the way for Russian forces, should they want to regroup and then try again, to be able to threaten cities in the center of Ukraine, like Dnipro on the Dnieper River, as well as cities to the north, like Kharkiv. And that would put real strain on a post-conflict Ukraine in terms of its ability to defend itself.
Meantime, let's go to a NATO member, Poland. It's reported that the drone, which crashed in its territory, was likely Russian-based. So how do you read into this development? And does it signal an escalation into NATO territory? What can the coalition do about it?
Yeah, well, this has happened, in terms of drones overflying NATO territory quite a number of times. In fact, we've had Russian drones, overflying Romania and doing a U-turn before coming back in to hit Odessa. Not just drones, but also cruise missiles. But this crash of a drone in Poland is, effectively a Russian military asset or Russian weapon falling onto NATO soil. I think my guess is that, given that everybody does want the peace process to play out, this won't necessarily result in a huge escalation, although Poland is absolutely within its rights to say that this is absolutely unconscionable and intolerable and not something that it would put up with. And of course, if it continues, then countries like Poland could do things like reserve the right to shoot down drones and missiles that they see as potentially approaching or over their territory, because it would represent a risk to their country and to civilians.
Dr. Sussex, I want to go back to Russia demanding formal veto power over security guarantees for Ukraine. Can I get your thoughts on how realistic this is and the implications, really, when trust and feasibility, or at least trust, is an issue for the feasibility of any future accord?
Look, honestly, I find it hard to see how the Russians could put this proposal with a straight face. It is effectively saying just the equivalent of Russia wanting to be a full voting member of NATO with veto rights over whatever NATO does with respect to Ukraine. So the idea that Ukraine can only defend itself and can only seek help to defend itself from the country that attacked it, if that attacking country agrees, is something that I think would be a complete non-starter in Kyiv, just as much as it would in European capitals as well.
All right. Appreciate your thoughts so very much. Thank you, Dr. Matthew Sussex, Associate Professor at the Griffith Asia Institute of Griffith University and Visiting Fellow at the Strategic and Defence Studies Centre at Australian National University.